Hello. Today we're going to talk about feeding and fertilizing your plants. We're going to talk about how important it is to make sure that your plants receive the proper nourishment, why you need to understand and correct your soil's pH if something is wrong, the benefits of organics, and the pros and cons of manufactured fertilizers. So, of course, you want to give your plants the best possible chance to survive and thrive. Because, after all, the goal is to have plants that thrive and perform to their peak in your garden. And that's where feeding and fertilizing comes in. So, you need to know how to determine and provide the best nutrients for your plants. And you also need to discover the essential role that soil pH plays in helping or hindering plants as they try to absorb the nutrients that are already in the soil and in the supplements you provide. So, we're also going to cover the pros and cons of organic versus man-made fertilizers and offer some eco-friendly gardening tips. So, a lot of people want to willy-nilly just toss some fertilizer on their garden and consider the job done. That is not the correct way. I'm not saying that you might not get some success with it, but that's not the way you want to do it. So it's easy to think that fertilizers have always been around, man-made fertilizers, that is, but they didn't really come on the gardening scene until the wake of World War II. Before that, gardeners provided natural plant nutrients such as organic matter and manures mixed with mineral sources such as shells, bones, and wood ashes. So, organic gardening methods have been around a lot longer than any of the man-made fertilizers that you might go to the store and buy. According to archaeologists, prehistoric gardeners sorted their trash and threw the organic scraps into kitchen middens or compost piles. So if you think about that, compost piles have been around a really long time. Some of these gardeners noticed that the seeds that they tossed into their compost piles grew a lot better and produced a lot more than any place else in the garden. And so they moved their community gardens into the compost piles. They built fires nearby. And then they used those sites as outdoor kitchens so they could harvest and cook their dinner right on the spot, which is really genius. I mean, we all would like to have our canning kitchen right by our garden and, of course, our chickens nearby, so all of the scraps could easily be dealt with. And these early gardeners were right on track. They knew that it took more than just planting the seeds into the soil. And they also understand that adding things to the soil like their kitchen scraps and their animal manure gave the food crops that they were growing the nourishment that they needed to grow better and produce more. And this applies to flowers as well, so not just vegetables. And before you even think about what fertilizer you're going to use, you do need to know which nutrients your soil needs and how much of each it needs. Now, I'm not big on soil testing, but we are going to talk a little bit about that in this chapter, because if you just can't get things to grow, this is something that you definitely want to consider doing. Soil contains both the micronutrients and the micronutrients that plants require. But few of us are blessed with perfect soil. I mean, you can certainly create it, and we've talked about exactly how to do that. But just when you're beginning, most of us don't have perfect soil. So you need to test the soil to find out what it does contain. There are laboratories, agricultural colleges, and cooperative extension offices that may have soil test kits you can buy. Again, these are expensive, but if you're really having issues with your soil and your garden really isn't producing the way it should be, then this is the way you're going to want to go. So after you get your soil testing kit, you're going to collect a few tablespoons of soil from various parts of your garden and mix them together and put them in the envelope supplied in the kit. Then you're going to send that sample, that soil sample, to the lab to be chemically analyzed. The lab is going to send you a report, and it's going to tell you your soil pH, which is your soil's level of acidity or alkalinity. Sorry, guys. The type of soil and the various percentages of nutrients that it contains. A good test is also going to recommend the nutrients and the amounts of each that you should apply to balance your soil's fertility and pH. You can get do-it-yourself test kits. Now, the results are not going to be as accurate or detailed, but it's going to give you a basic idea of where your soil's pH is at. If you have pretty good soil, you have neighbors that have pretty good soil, and you can talk to them. You can find out if they've had a soil test done. You can find out what they might have added to their garden. If you've got pretty good soil to start with, I would definitely recommend a DIY kit and just kind of see what it says. And then you can add nutrients based on the recommendations on the back of the nutrient packages that you determine that you need to add. Now, when it comes to understanding your soil's pH, we have a lot more scientific ways to do this than the old timers did. You might hear somebody calling soil sour or sweet. Acid soil would be a sour soil, and alkaline soil would be a sweet soil. And before soil tests were available and before they were widely used, a lot of gardeners and farmers would eat their soil, and they would determine on whether it tasted sour or sweet what their soil needed to have added. Now, I certainly don't recommend that you do this. I recommend that you go ahead and get a soil test done if you feel like you need to do that. Get the scientific results and get a pH scale recommendation that more accurately describes the level of acidity or alkalinity of your soil. And again, why does all this matter? You might think this is a bunch of fluff and, who cares? But it is really, really important to understand the pH of your garden soil. The pH levels affect the solubility of plant nutrients. So what this means is the further the pH level gets from the neutral point on either end of the scale, the less availability that the plant nutrients are going to be to the plants. And this is why one of your most important goals in garden improvement is working to neutralize your soil's pH. So basically, if your pH is wrong in your soil, your plants aren't going to be able to take up the nutrients that they need in order to thrive. And that's not what you want to have happen. And it isn't going to matter how much extra nutrients that you might add, because you might be thinking, well, if they're having trouble taking it up, I'll just add extra, and that's going to help. No, that's not going to help. The good news is many plants are fairly flexible and can thrive in soil that, give or take a point, hovers around the neutral 7 on the pH scale. But most plants are comfortable in the 6 to 7 range. So, and that's a pretty neutral range. There's going to be plants like blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons that want that acidity. And they're not going to be comfortable in a neutral range. this is why it's so important to know your plants and understand if they need any special soil acidity or if they need alkaline soil or what exactly they need, so that you can give them everything they need to perform the best that they can. It simplifies things for gardeners from the Midwest and East, where acid rain regularly lowers the soil pH. So what that means is those of us in the Midwest and East can get by with a soil test every 5 or 6 years. But those who garden in the West or Southwest, where soil is naturally alkaline and need to make attempts to neutralize it, they need to get a soil test at least every other year and amend it annually to help maintain a more neutral pH. So they're the ones that have it really rough because they've got to keep their soil in that neutral range. And that's not always an easy thing to do. I mean, it might seem at first like it's really easy, but changing a soil's pH is nowhere near as easy as changing the pH in a hydroponic or aquaponic system. So, to correct the pH balance of soil, the most used additive is compost. This is because this improves the soil and neutralizes the soil. You want to put on a 3-inch layer or more. More is better in most cases. If you have plants actively growing, I encourage you to just put a 3-inch layer and do not put that up against the stems of your plants. Keep it back a little ways, because if you remember, putting any kind of soil or mulch right up against those stems encourages pest and disease. So that's why you don't want to do that. If you need to acidify your soil, you can add peat moss or garden sulfur and work it in either according to the test results if you did that, or the package directions if you did not get an actual soil test that gives you those recommendations. Acidifying soil is not a one-time deal because peat moss neutralizes as it breaks down and sulfur shifts through the soil, gradually being overpowered by the soil's natural alkalinity. So you need to repeat these processes as often as tests indicate. And this is why it is so hard to grow blueberries where I am, because the soil is not acidic enough, and even adding in all of the amendments, the soil wants to go right back to what it is, which is not acidic, and then the plants just don't thrive. So, if you need to increase your alkalinity, you can add powdered limestone to the soil according to the package directions. This is rarely needed in a vegetable garden, but it is often done in lawns east of the Mississippi River. And this is because lawn grasses prefer a slightly alkaline soil, whereas lawn weeds prefer acidic conditions. Lawns that are limed annually in the fall become naturally thick and weed-free over time, reducing or eliminating the need for man-made weed and feed products. So keep that in mind. If you want a weed-free lawn and you don't want to use man-made products, you can add some lime in the fall, and you can see how well that does in your area. Now, the soil test report that you receive will tell you which and how much of each nutrient you need to apply to your specific soil. But if this sounds complicated and overwhelming and you think your soil is of average fertility, save yourself the trouble and the expense. And just get some fertilizer advice from successful neighborhood gardeners. You can also simplify your fertilizing soil by buying an all-in-one bagged fertilizer. Applied according to instructions, it can only add to the nutrients already in your soil. It's very important that you follow those instructions. Adding more is just going to be a waste, and might even end up harming your plants in the long run. So always follow instructions on whatever fertilizer or other product that you're going to be buying. Okay, next we're going to talk about fertilizer ingredients. So we're going to talk about the micronutrients because these are the primary nutrients in any fertilizer. This is the N, P, and K. Nitrogen, as we learned, promotes deep green foliage color and rapid early and green growth. Phosphorus aids healthy root growth, seed growth, and winter hardiness. And potassium is necessary for disease resistance, strong stems, and plentiful yield. Remember that the numbers on the fertilizer bag represented the percentages of these three nutrients, N, P, and K in that order. So if a fertilizer contains equal amounts of these three ingredients, such as the 12-12-12 that a lot of people like to buy around here, that is a complete fertilizer. If it has only one or two of these nutrients, it is an incomplete fertilizer. The larger the numbers, the more concentrated and often more expensive the fertilizer. If you choose to fertilize, you should probably use a fairly weak formulation with a balanced formula. A fertilizer that contains equal parts of these three micronutrients. Premium fertilizers contain the secondary nutrients calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, along with some of the 7 trace elements: copper, boron, iron, chloride, and chlorides, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc. Plants only need these in minute quantities, so reserve these fertilizers for correcting nutrient deficiencies specifically identified by a soil test. Read fertilizer packages carefully and pay attention to the analysts. Those numbers that indicate the percentages of N, P, and K, it doesn't matter whether the package says azalea food, rose food, or vegetable food. What matters is the analysts. You don't need to buy a special type of fertilizer for each type of plant you need to fertilize. So, human-made or synthetic fertilizers, as they're called, come in a wide variety of strength using the same NPK analysis that we've talked about. Human-made fertilizers also come in several forms, including water-soluble powders, liquids, and both are diluted with water and either poured on the soil or sprayed on the foliage. These fertilizers are fast-acting and often used as a plant pick-me-up. Time or controlled release fertilizers are capsule-like solids, or they may be round balls. But they basically have the nutrients inside, and they are made to release those nutrients slowly. To apply, you broadcast or spread them over the soil. Granulars are small nuggets that you apply over the soil, like the capsule variety, to release the nutrients slowly. Now, you can use the two types together, and a lot of nurseries do, but you need to be very careful that you're not overdoing it if you do that. So, the most important thing to remember with human-made fertilizers is that it's easy to overdo and it's easy to waste. Applying too much can harm your plants, causing weak growth that is susceptible to pests and disease. So follow label directions carefully. Make sure that the fertilizers are not damaging your plants. because of the undissolved product touching the foliage or the roots. And you might even want to dilute human-made fertilizers to half the strength before applying, because what you need to remember is your soil already contains most of the nutrients your plants need. And you're adding fertilizer to give that little bit of extra boost. Even at half strength, the fertilizer is still providing that boost, and you ensure that you're doing no harm at the same time. So that's something you definitely want to think about. I know that in nurseries they use both slow release and liquid, and they do the liquid on a daily basis. It is at a half strength. Some even do a quarter strength. That is to boost growth. So when you go to the store, you're buying this beautiful plant that looks so, so good. And a lot of people think because that's what the nursery is doing, that's what they need to continue to do at home. This is simply not the case. If you want to use a little bit of liquid fertilizer because you think your plant isn't blooming like it should, or maybe it's just stopped growing and you want to give it that little bit of boost, you can certainly do that. Any potted plant that you buy from a nursery like that, you probably need to water it once a day just to keep it hydrated. But that also helps to flush that excess fertilizer out so that it's not sitting in the soil and building up and eventually damaging your plant. So just some things to keep in mind if you buy potted plants and you keep them in the pot that they come in. So if you're thinking of going the organic route, you're not alone. Organic fertilizers are as popular now as ever. Applying mineral and organic nutrients such as shell grit, bone meal, composted manure, blood meal, and other organic fertilizers to the soil surface is a good way to recycle byproducts of mining, lumbering, and food processing. And because these organic nutrients slowly work down into the soil, it's hard to damage the plants by overdosing or burning plant tissues, which is something that definitely can occur with man-made fertilizers, especially if they're not properly applied, if the plant is not receiving enough water to flush those fertilizers out. Because like I said, the nurseries really do over-fertilize to make those plants pretty for you to buy. So, something that I really like using in my garden is mushroom compost. We buy it here. I also like using animal manure from my horse, my goats, my sheep, my rabbits, whatever animals I happen to have. I do make sure that this is well composted, because I don't want to put it fresh on my garden unless I'm tilling it in, and then I'm going to let it sit there over the winter and break down. So one way that you can get this if you don't have it is to find mushroom farmers or farmers with livestock in your area and find out what they do with that. Now, you might have to go clean the stalls out, or they might have a pile that you can, shovel into buckets or the bed of your truck. But it may be a free resource for you. Now, if you are getting animal manure, remember what we talked about in the last video. You may have a fly problem. You may want to put some diatomaceous earth on top of that when you get it home. You may want to cover it. This way you don't have a bunch of flies hatching and flying around your garden or around your compost pile, depending on where you put it. Nobody wants that, and it's not going to make your neighbors very happy if suddenly you're bringing all this stuff home, and not only might they be dealing with the smell, but then they're dealing with all these extra flies too. So that's definitely something to think about. Okay, there is a drawback to dense, slowly dissolving organic fertilizers such as bone meal, wood ashes, and other minerals. And this is that it can take several months for them to dissolve and become available to plant roots. You can compensate for this, however, by planting ahead and scattering them over the soil in the fall after you clean your garden up. Over the winter, the nutrients will gradually find their way into the soil thanks to rain and melting snow. And once in the soil, beneficial bacteria slowly break down, making the nutrients available to the garden plants you set out the following spring. So, something that I really like to do is just dump stuff on my garden as soon as I'm done with it in the fall. Wood ash from our wood burner. Clean out from the barn stalls. I don't really put a lot of food scraps because I don't want to attract critters. And if I do put food scraps, I dig down and I kind of bury them a little bit. I don't really have a lot of bones or things like that. I have dumped some fertilizers that had gotten wet, and like bone meal and things like that, blood meal, all those things that had drawn moisture and I knew wasn't going to be any good. And so I have scattered that on my garden and just let it kind of work its way through over the winter, and then till it all in come spring. So that is something that you can do. I also dump my pots of potting soil up there, and I know that some of the ones I bought from the store do still have a little bit of the slow release fertilizer in it. I don't worry about that. I feel like mixing the soil in and tilling everything in, I'm slowly improving my soil. And eventually I would like to go no-till. That's something that we're working on, but we're just not there yet. So, a useful trick for applying solid fertilizer during the growing season is either to top dress or side dress with it. If you choose top dressing, spread solid fertilizer across the surface of the garden as mulch. With side dressing, apply the fertilizer between rows of crops or in a circle around individual plants. You want to be sure the fertilizers don't touch the plants. You don't want to just literally pour fertilizer and use it as mulch. You want to use the recommended amount. And never let fertilizer come into direct contact with your plant tissue because it can burn the plant tissue. And if your plant tissue is damaged, that's going to let pests and disease in. So that's something that you don't want to do. When it comes to manure and other fertilizers, manure is among the oldest and best organic fertilizer. It's been used as long ago as 2300 BCE in Mesopotamian gardens. I know I mispronounced that. Manure is a good source of micronutrients and also conditions the soil by aerating it and improving its ability to retain moisture. Poultry and rabbit manure are a little bit stronger. So, horse and cow manure are among the most nutrient rich. So the best thing to do, no matter what you're using, I know that you can use rabbit and goat straight on your garden, and that's fine. But you don't really want to do that. You really want to compost the manure and let it break down, and make sure it's not hot when you're using it. Because manure nutrients will affect your plants. If you want to boost the blooming potential of your garden, such as your flower garden, you are going to want to use poultry manure because it's relatively high in phosphorus. And as you know, phosphorus promotes flowering and fruiting. So there's also worm castings. So they're ready from the get-go, and they won't burn your plants. You can use those straight out of your worm farm if you have one. Worm castings contain a full complement of trace minerals, making them an organic super plant food. In addition to nutrients, worm castings contain humic acid, which stimulates plant growth, and their high organic matter content helps to retain soil moisture. So, you can use worm castings as a tonic by sprinkling moisture-dry castings on the soil sparingly anytime during the growing season. You want to use about a tablespoon per plant, and it doesn't matter the size of plant. Doing this twice during the growing season feeds a plant for 6 months. There are many other organic fertilizers that are good to use as well. In fact, any organic material contributes some nutrients to your garden. So I don't have this up right now, but I'm going to give you guys a cheat sheet that you can use that is going to give the approximate nutrient analysis of some various organic products like alfalfa hay, blood meal, cow and horse manure, peat moss, and so on, so that you have that, so you can think about, what might you want to put into your garden, and how is that going to affect whatever it is that you're growing. Now when it comes to liquid fertilizers, plants sort of drink. So they slurp up nutrients dissolved in groundwater through fine root hairs that grow along the anchoring, or the ends of their anchoring roots. So these are like the little white hair-like roots you peel off a carrot before you eat it. So when you fertilize a plant that makes sense to them, they can absorb the fertilizer through their root hairs. Scientists call this process osmosis, but it's really not too scientific. And I feel like giving a liquid fertilizer occasionally is a really good way to boost your plant and make sure it's getting those extra nutrients that it needs. A lot of times, if I notice that a plant needs, say, some iron, the leaves are a little bit yellow, it's looking like it has a little iron chlorosis, and maybe it just needs a little boost, I will use a liquid iron supplement for plants and just kind of spray it on and really drench that plant good with that. And then I will pour a little bit in the soil, but it's the drenching of the plant several times over a specific course of time, and that plant will usually green right back up. So compost tea is a fantastic liquid fertilizer. And it has some big advantages over solid organic fertilizers. The liquid fertilizer is fast-acting for 2 reasons. First, its nutrients are already in liquid form and are readily available to the roots to take up. Second, if compost tea is applied to plant leaves, they absorb the solution, which can bring about seemingly instant plant rejuvenation. Compost tea is an excellent, eco-friendly, fast-acting fertilizer. More importantly, it has beneficial organisms that convert organic material into compost in the first place. That also give off compounds that repel foliar or leaf diseases. Some of these organisms remain active even in finished compost and continue to produce these compounds. Plants showered with compost tea repel leaf diseases and are generally healthier, growing thicker leaves, which make it difficult for disease-carrying sucking insects such as aphids to penetrate. Now, another thing that I'm going to give you is a recipe for a living compost tea you can make yourself. However, with that said, if you don't want to make the compost tea yourself and you are looking for an absolutely fantastic compost tea that you can buy, I want to recommend Moo Poo Tea from Annie Haven. It is fabulous. It does contain cow manure from cows on her farm, and she does sell it. You look that up. I have used that myself. I absolutely love it. I have seen how wonderful it is. And I do use an aquarium pump in my compost tea so that I can aerate my compost tea and add in that extra oxygen. So definitely something to think about if you want to go the compost tea route. And like I said, you can make it yourself, or you can just go online and order some from Annie. Other liquid organic fertilizers include fish emulsion and powdered seaweed or kelp. Fish emulsion is a thick brown concentration of fish waste that supplies ample nitrogen. Some commercial brands smell fishy. I have never smelled any that are deodorized. I can tell you, I have diluted it and sprayed it on the foliage of my plants. And it can attract cats and other creatures. It makes the entire neighborhood smell like fish. So it definitely smells strong, and if you don't want a strong smelling fertilizer, you don't want to use fish emulsion. Seaweed concentrate is rich in trace elements. It is especially good to get seedlings off to a strong start, and it is vegan friendly. So seaweed is pricey. You can dilute it and spray it on the foliage as a tonic. I just put a little bit in the ground when I'm planting my vegetables below where I'm going to plant them, so that the roots can go down and take that up. On older plants like my roses, I just put a little bit on the top of the soil and I mix it in. And I know it's going to be slower going down, working its way through the soil. But because I put some in the soil in the bottom of the hole when I planted, and I amend that at least once a year, sometimes a couple times a year, I feel like my soil is pretty good and my roses really do well. So, again, you have to decide what is right for you. With compost tea, I've used the Moo Poo tea and I've never noticed a smell. So if you're looking for something that doesn't have a smell, that's going to give you the most bang for your buck, compost tea is what you want to take a look at. So, now you need to make a decision. Organic fertilizers are fairly straightforward and safe to use. Human-made fertilizers, on the other hand, require careful handling and application. Organic fertilizers are made from living or once living things, and that's what makes them organic. A manufactured fertilizer can be labeled as organic even though part of the product is synthetic. The use of the word organic can also vary from state to state. So you need to know your state's law. You need to take your time and read the package information and ingredient lists carefully if organics are where you want to go. Remember that the ingredients and the micronutrients in the fertilizer are the same, whether the product is organic or synthetic. You just have to decide how important the source of those nutrients is to you and your gardening efforts. So, here's what you need to know. Before you apply that first drop of fertilizer, you need to determine your soil pH. Is it acidic or is it alkaline? You need to see what it needs and what it doesn't need. This is going to save you money in the end. The primary micronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, N, P, and K, provide balanced nutrition for your plants. Both organic and human-made fertilizers come in solid and liquid forms and contain the same nutrients. So individual gardeners have to decide which type and form is best for them. And compost tea is a fast-acting, natural, easy-to-make fertilizer that you can give your plants. And it will boost growth, and it will give you some really amazing results. So that's it for today. Are there any questions? I do check into the group multiple times a week to see if you have any questions as you're watching these videos. You can hashtag replay on the video. You can ask the question in the video, or you can just ask the question in the group. It doesn't matter how you do it. I do come in and I check under the video and I check in the group, and I really want to answer the questions that you guys have and really help you to understand your soil needs and get your soil going good so that you can have that bountiful garden that you've always wanted. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and I will be back next week on Tuesday with our weekly lesson. Have a great rest of your week.